Beneath the blazing sun of the southern continent, where red earth stretches to a trembling horizon and eucalyptus whispers in lonely winds, lies a story much darker than the cheerful legends of explorers, convicts, and gold rush dreams. Colonial Australia is remembered by many as a frontier of rugged opportunity, where the unwanted were shipped to remake themselves, and where a nation was born from grit and iron. But that is only the tale polished smooth by time. The real story hides in the shadows, a brutal empire built through labor, stolen lands, starvation, lashings, disappearances, and silent graves. Indigenous voices silenced, chains on human ankles, a colony carved not by ambition alone, but by cruelty, fear, and blood. Tonight, we uncover the parts of Australia's past that official stories often buried, the horrors officials denied, settlers justified, and survivors carried in their bones. This is the untold truth of colonial Australia, where civilization wore a mask, and beneath it, something far more sinister watched and waited. Before the ships ever touched the ragged shores of the southern world, the idea of Australia existed only as a whisper in London's smoky taverns and in the echoing marble corridors of Parliament. It was spoken of by men in powdered wigs who had never seen its coastline, men whose hands never knew soil or rope, men who ruled with quills while others bled for their signatures. Britain had a problem. Its prisons overflowed, packed with debtors, thieves, protesters, and those branded criminals simply for being poor. Crime was not always a sin in those days. Often, it was hunger given a name, a loaf of bread stolen by a mother, a handkerchief lifted by a starving boy. The punishment? Transportation, exile, and chains. The American colonies had once absorbed Britain's unwanted, but after revolution severed that lifeline, the crown needed a new dumping ground, a place far enough that the empire could forget the souls it sent there. A continent so distant that even hope could not follow. So came the idea, send them to the ends of the earth. And thus, in May of 1787, the first fleet departed, 11 ships, over 1,400 souls, a floating city of misery and authority bound together by salt, air, and iron. Convict women huddled in the darkness below deck, praying for daylight or death, whichever came first. Shackled men were stacked like cargo, breathing the same recycled stench of despair. Children, some barely 10 years old, sat in confusion, punished not for moral failings but for being born into hunger. Their crimes were engraved on paper. Their suffering was carved into bone. Weeks blurred into months. On the decks, sailors cracked whips like punctuation marks in a cruel sentence. Food rotted, water stagnated, scurvy gnawed at gums and spirits alike. Those who fell ill were tossed aside, bodies shriveling in the shadows, eyes pleading for mercy in a world that had none left to give. Officers watched from above like gods carved from stone. For them, discipline was faith. Obedience was purity. A convict was not a human being, but a warning. Storms battered the fleet. Salt waves shattered against hulls like hammers of fate. Rats bit sleeping prisoners. Chains rusted into skin. Some prayed to return home. Others prayed never to see land again. For land meant labor. Land meant punishment under the open sun. Land meant a second hell, promised, unavoidable, waiting. When the 1.5-year nightmare finally ended, the ships drifted into Botany Bay. It was not the paradise described by Captain Cook. No gentle Eden, no fertile stretch of green. It was harsh, dry, wild, an ancient land that resisted intrusion with every grain of sand and thorn. The convicts stared in silence. They had reached the end of the world, and no one was there to greet them. There were no farms to work, no houses to inhabit, no waiting supply stores or welcoming communities. Just unbroken wilderness and an unspoken truth that rolled across the unbending horizon. Food dwindled. Tools broke. Men dropped in exhaustion, their muscles refusing another sunrise. Women labored until their hands bled. Soldiers rationed punishment like currency, reminding convicts that freedom was not a destination, but an illusion. Every night, the air hummed with insects and whispered with wind through strange trees. Somewhere beyond the campfires, unseen eyes watched, ancient caretakers of a land about to experience violence disguised as civilization. And the irony was sharp enough to taste. Those sent to build a colony were those considered unfit for society. Yet they were expected to carve a nation from dust. Justice had not followed them. Only power had. Governor Arthur Phillip enforced discipline with rigid grace. Yet even he could not tame an untamable experiment. Rations shrank to crumbs, and despair spread like sickness. Convicts worked until collapse, backs bending under authority, ribs protruding beneath sunburnt flesh. The first crime in the New World was hunger. The first punishment was suffering. When a man stole food, he was flogged until skin hung in ribbons. When one attempted escape, chains were fastened until iron merged with flesh. Death was not the greatest fear here. Failure was. Children grew thin and silent. Women bore the weight of forced assignments to officers or settlers. Punishment walked alongside them like a shadow with teeth. Those who dared resist found themselves on Norfolk Island, a penal settlement spoken of in whispers, a place where men were worked until madness claimed them, where the ocean roared like a beast, reminding prisoners daily that there was no escape, only deeper torment. Australia did not begin as a nation. It began as an experiment in control. But cruelty, like seed, grows roots. Convicts who survived did so by hardening, by becoming creatures of silence and obedience. The earth beneath their feet drank their sweat, tears, and sometimes blood. They dug ditches, carved roads, raised crude shelters, each stone a testament to punishment disguised as progress. Yet within this darkness, a peculiar truth ignited. The oppressed adapted. Some learned the land, others plotted resistance. Whispers of rebellion flickered in the night, fragile as candle flame, but impossible to extinguish. Because even in hell, memory lives. And even in chains, hearts carry the shape of freedom. Australia's birth was not noble. It was engineered suffering, wrapped in empire's flag, enforced by rope and musket, whispered into history as discipline, progress, destiny. But fate writes strange endings for cruel beginnings. One day, the very people exiled here would forge identity from ashes. Yet the ghosts of those early years still breathe in the soil, in unmarked graves, in stories seldom told. And history, like the land itself, remembers. Dawn came quietly over the new colony, washing the settlement in pale gold. Smoke curled from dying campfires, and the scent of salt carried memories of England across a sea too vast to ever cross again. Convicts stirred, some from hunger, others from nightmares, and soldiers tightened their boots like armor against a land they could not understand. But the British were not the first to greet that sun. Long before white sails appeared on the horizon, Australia had already lived 1,000 lifetimes. For over 60,000 years, the First Nations people walked this land, storytellers of the dreaming, caretakers of river and desert, rainforests and stone. They did not conquer the earth, they belonged to it. Every river had a memory, every mountain a spirit, every campfire a thread in a tapestry older than any empire. Yet on that morning, the newcomers saw none of this. They saw only land. They saw only empty. Because back in London, officials had spoken a phrase like a knife. Terra nullius, land belonging to no one. It was a convenient lie, powerful as any musket. If the land belonged to no one, then no one could protest its theft. But the land spoke, and its people watched. In the first months, Aboriginal clans approached the settlement with curiosity, observing pale-skinned strangers who carried thunder in tubes and wore clothes in sweltering heat. They had witnessed strangers before, Dutch sailors, fleeting, curious. But this time, something felt different. These newcomers unloaded the earth itself from ships. Tools, animals, women, children. They had not come to visit. They had come to stay. Communication began not with words, but with gestures, hands extended, offerings of fish and bark tools. Some colonial journals even record laughter, trade, moments where worlds briefly met across an ancient divide. But misunderstanding is a seed that grows fast. The British interpreted Aboriginal hospitality as weakness. Aboriginal people interpreted British hunger and confusion as temporary misfortune, strangers needing guidance. They offered water. They offered pathways. They showed sacred fishing spots. In return, the British claimed the earth beneath them. Imagine a land where every tree holds a story, where ancestors live in the soil, where songs map rivers and stars guide footsteps. Then imagine men arriving with flags, claiming hills with a few strokes of pen and ink. To the colonizers, land was property. To the First Nations, land was identity. And when identity is threatened, memory becomes armor. Tensions thickened with each passing month. Convicts, desperate and starving, stole native food and water. Soldiers followed orders to secure territory. And slowly, inevitably, the first conflicts ignited. Not declared as wars, but whispered as incidents, then erased in official reports. History would later sanitize the violence into phrases like frontier conflict, settler friction, necessary expansion, but that language cannot wash blood from sand. The British never officially called it war, but war it became. Not in sudden battles, but in ambush and reprisal, torch and rifle, silence and nightfall. Aboriginal warriors defended their land not as rebels, but as sons and daughters protecting home. They used the bush as ally, moving unseen, striking with spears or fire, vanishing like wind through gum trees. Settlers responded with muskets, punishment raids, and laws written in English but enforced with bullets. To kill an Aboriginal person was not murder. To resist a settler was rebellion. Some officers recorded massacres with chilling pride, like entries in a hunting diary. One soldier wrote after a raid, "We did our duty. Women and children fell among the rest." Another described it simply, "Dispersed the blacks." Dispersed, a word that hides graves beneath politeness. And yet, this violence hid in shadows, because empire prefers glory to guilt. Official records avoided confession. Settlers told stories of savage tribes, feigning innocence even as smoke from burned camps drifted across evening skies. And the greatest wound was not death alone, but disappearance. Stories suppressed, languages forbidden, children taken, names erased, ceremonies punished, songs silenced. Imagine knowing your land, your river, your ancestors, and waking each day to strangers rewriting your truth, insisting you never existed. This was not conquest. It was erasure disguised as destiny, resistance and resilience. Yet Aboriginal people did not vanish. They survived, adapted, endured. Warriors like Pemulwuy, Yagan, and Tur rose in defiance. Legends whose names once echoed through bushland and now rise again in truth-telling. Pemulwuy, scarred and unbreakable, struck fear in soldiers. Bullets could not kill him. When he finally fell, his head was taken to England in a jar, a morbid souvenir of empire. Such stories were once whispered in shame. Now they are spoken with pride, because resistance leaves footprints even when history tries to sweep them away. As the colony expanded, towns rose on lands soaked in conflict. Sydney, Parramatta, Hobart, Brisbane. Each carried progress in one hand and silence in the other. Officials toasted growth with wine. Convicts pressed forward seeking freedom. Settlers plowed fields as if the earth had always been theirs. And beneath it all, the First Nations people endured loss unimaginable. Land stripped away. Sacred sites desecrated. Kin murdered or displaced. Cultures punished. Children stolen under protection laws. This was not a brief clash. It was a century-long wound, a wound still healing. Yet for all that was taken, something remained stronger than empire. Dreaming stories continued in hushed circles around firelight. Languages whispered from elders to children. Ceremonies carried out in secret under moonlit skies. Because culture older than pyramids does not die. It waits, it breathes, it rises again. And today, across Australia, that resurgence grows. Voices once silenced, now teaching, singing, reclaiming, honoring ancestors who stood their ground. The colonizers believed they could erase a people, but history has a long memory, and truth always finds its way back to light. The silent war was never truly silent, only unheard, and every nation that builds on broken bones must one day face the echoes. The colony grew, but not in comfort. Civilization did not rise in straight lines here. It clawed its way upward, uneven and haunted, like a tree forced to grow on rock. Tents became crude huts, timber walls emerged from earth still fresh with blood, and gravel paths spread like veins across the settlement. But beneath every step lay the same truth. This was not a home. It was a sentence. And Britain, far across the world, watched with cold expectation. Convicts who had imagined Australia as a second chance soon discovered they had not escaped prison. They had entered a place where punishment breathed, where authority did not merely restrain the body, it consumed the soul. Australia would not be built by hope. It would be built by fear. In London, politicians spoke of reform. They envisioned a system where the wicked were purified by hardship. Discipline, they believed, was virtue. Pain was correction. It was a theology as much as law, a gospel of iron. And so punishment was ritual here, almost sacred in its cruelty. The lash was the colony's language, rawhide dipped in salt, delivered with methodical precision. 50 lashes could strip flesh to tendon. 100 could kill a man. 200? That was not execution, it was spectacle. Convicts were tied to triangles, wooden punishment frames. Others were lashed to trees. Flesh tore, blood sprayed, flies gathered, and the cries of the condemned crawled through the bush like ghosts begging for release. Sometimes the flogger, his arm tired, paused not for mercy but exhaustion. And when he resumed, the crowd, convicts and free settlers alike, watched in mandated silence. Authority believed punishment was a lesson, but the only thing it taught was obedience. Not all pain draws blood. Some thrives in darkness. Solitary confinement was a world without daylight, a pit where sanity clawed at the walls. In cramped stone cells, men sat with only their breath to mark time. Hours dissolved into days, days dissolved into madness. Some emerged twitching and wordless. Others never emerged at all. Then came leg irons, chains that bruised and cut until ankles swelled like bruised fruit. Sleep with them, work with them, dream of freedom while the metal reminded you that your body was not yours. And yet, the cruelest punishment was not iron or lash. It was starvation. Food was rationed not by need, but by obedience. Bread for submission, hunger for resistance. A disobedient man might eat less than a dog. A rebellious one might be left to chew on hope alone. Hunger shapes the mind. Hunger breaks the spirit. Hunger is a quieter whip, but no less sharp. If Australia was a punishment, then Norfolk Island was punishment's altar. A speck of land isolated by wild sea, winds screaming like banshees across cliffs, Norfolk was spoken of in whispers that stung like frost. It was where they sent the worst of the worst, a phrase that often meant those who dare dream of freedom. There, men worked until their hands bled and then worked more. Food was scarce, brutality abundant. The commandants were legends of severity, men who saw compassion as corruption. One convict wrote, "We are treated worse than beasts. The sea is our prison walls." Escape was a myth. Hope was treason. And yet, even in that corner of torment, humanity glimmered. A muttered prayer, a hidden loaf shared among brothers, a whispered song from stolen culture. But the system did not reward hope. It crushed it. Norfolk Island did not break men. It erased them. Fear as foundation. Fear seeped everywhere, in the crack of boots on gravel, in the snap of orders barked across dusty yards, in the metallic click of shackles locking shut. Soldiers, too, felt it. Fear of mutiny, fear of failure, fear that the empire which demanded obedience would turn its gaze upon them next. Warders feared inmates. Inmates feared lash masters. Everyone feared hunger. Everyone feared disease, and always, they feared the bush, that vast, uncharted wildness beyond the settlement where dreams of escape tangled with nightmares of death. Australia's wilderness was no gentle promise. It was punishment's accomplice. Men fled only to die of thirst, be speared by fear and rumor, or vanish into trees that whispered like spirits. Those who were recaptured returned gaunt and trembling, living warnings dragged back in irons to be paraded like trophies of the empire's will. Fear built the colony brick by brick, and discipline laid mortar between each silent stone. Governors came and went, each imposing their philosophy, though philosophy often sharpened into cruelty. Some, like Philip, ruled with stern necessity. Others, like Governor Macquarie later on, wielded ambition and order like twin weapons. But some saw power as license and punishment as pleasure. Magistrates with cold eyes sentenced men for insolence, for exhaustion, for speaking their native tongue, for daring to remember life before exile. Guards enforced hierarchy not just with batons, but with humiliation. Standing in the yards at dawn, convicts waited for their rations and orders. Yet what they feared most was not starvation, nor flogging, nor the night cells. They feared becoming invisible, disappearing not by death, but by forgetting who they once were. Oppression builds pressure, and pressure births rebellion. Whispers rose in barracks and huts. Convicts traded glances, coded signals of defiance. Songs hummed in the night carried rhythms older than the colony. Plans of uprising flickered like sparks, small, dangerous, persistent. They did not rebel for glory. They rebelled because humans only bow so long before instinct demands we stand again. There were riots, small, bloody, silenced swiftly. There were plots, discovered, punished, buried. There were men who chose the noose over bondage, stepping from the gallows platform with a kind of pride, as though death could restore what life had stolen. Australia calls them convicts, but many were something else entirely. Prisoners of empire, victims of a social war, souls who refused to kneel. And in the cracks of authority's iron rule, something unexpected began to grow. Identity. Not British, not free, not yet Australian, but something stirring, forming, rising. Convicts forged loyalty not through law, but through suffering. Some became bushrangers, outlaws who rejected the empire entirely. Others became builders, farmers, laborers, shaping a land that once tried to break them. Fear controlled them, but it could not define them forever. Because fear is powerful, yes, but not eternal. In time, discipline did what the empire wanted least. It created survivors who knew hardship better than any ruler. Hardship teaches resilience. Resilience breeds identity. Identity cannot be chained. And though punishment scarred the early colony, it also forged the unspoken foundation of a future nation, one that would one day reckon with its past, question authority, and carve its own destiny separate from the empire that birthed it. But redemption is never clean, and before Australia could rise, its story would sink lower still. For in the years to come, the colony would face a new terror, not the lash, not hunger, not the iron of Britain's law, but starvation so profound, so desperate, that humanity itself would bend and tremble. The bush would not feed them, supplies would not arrive, and nature, indifferent and vast, would show its teeth. And in that crucible, the hunger years began. Hunger has a way of stripping civilization down to its bones. For the convicts and settlers of early Australia, punishment was constant, fear was routine, but hunger, true hunger, was the torment that humbled even the harshest men. It crept quietly at first, a gnawing ache beneath ribs already sore from labor. But as weeks passed, and supply ships failed to appear on the horizon, that ache became a roar, a mad, unrelenting need that turned hope into hallucination and despair into madness. Fields planted in optimism refused to yield. Tools shattered against stubborn soil baked by unrelenting sun or drowned by sudden rains that turned ground into thick, choking mud. Seeds imported from Britain, gentle seeds bred for soft English earth and mild English seasons, struggled here, in a land older and less forgiving than anything the colonists imagined. Crops failed, flowers spoiled, livestock weakened, then disappeared into bushland or died where they stood, carcasses stripped by wild dogs and the thick rot of heat. It seemed as if even nature rejected the intruders, as though the land itself whispered with ancient breath, "You do not belong here." Rations grew smaller, bread shrank into crumbs. Salted meat became a memory spoken of like myth. Officers still ate, not well, but enough. Soldiers scraped by with hard biscuits and thin broth. But convicts felt hunger most brutally. Their suffering fed the system. And when there's not enough food to go around, it was not the powerful who starved first. Desperate eyes watched cooking pots with hope that never materialized. Men fought over scraps not larger than fingernails. Women chewed grass, leaves, anything soft enough to swallow. Some boiled leather if they could find it. Boots softened over flames, belts cut into strips just to trick the stomach into believing it had been fed. And then came the worst shame, the silent, horrible truth whispered only when the wind drowned the words. Some turn to the dead. When a human body becomes desperate, morals are the first casualties. A corpse buried shallow in sandy soil might become a feast for someone frantic enough to dig in the night. Officials denied it, of course. Clergy scoffed at the rumors. But stories linger like ghosts for a reason. And in the darkest corners of the settlement, where shadows clung like fever sweat, hunger carved men into something less than human and somehow more desperate than any beast. Still, work continued. The lash did not rest simply because ribs showed through skin and limbs trembled with weakness. Dreams of mercy dissolved with every sunrise. A man who refused to labor collapsed, not into pity, but punishment. To refuse work was defiance. To defy was to invite pain. Better to dig until arms gave out than to suffer the whip's kiss across a back already raw. Convicts whispered prayers, not for salvation, but for bread. They dreamed not of freedom, but of stew, of steaming loaves, of apples from orchards they would never see again. A world away, in England's taverns and parlors, people spoke of the colonies as opportunity, punishment, cleansing. They did not smell starvation in the stories. They did not hear bones clicking softly under skin. And through it all, the British government watched from afar with a cold patience. This was a test, they believed, a crucible to shape criminals into subjects or bury them as failures of the crown. Hardship, they argued, purifies. Suffering, they insisted, reforms. But out here, hardship did not purify, it hollowed. Suffering did not reform, it destroyed. The experiment did not shape men, it consumed them. Yet amid all this misery, the land offered lessons. Harsh ones, yes, but real. Some convicts learned to fish from those who had lived here since time immemorial. They learned which berries killed and which sustained, which waters offered life and which slid into marshy death. Some First Nations people, despite everything they endured, shared food when they could. Their generosity, born from cultural law, not colonial decree, saved lives. But too often, British arrogance rejected help, choosing hunger over humility. Even so, not every day was despair. Some days the sea gave generously, and fish shimmered in nets like silver blessings. Some mornings, gardens sprouted just enough greens to spark fleeting hope. But hope can be cruel when it comes to crumbs. It teases, it promises, and then it slips away again, like a mirage on a scorched plain. As months passed, hunger burrowed into bones and into memory. Men wrote letters begging for news of ships, their ink smudged by trembling hands. Women watched children shrink, their faces sharp as knives. Commanders paced shorelines, peering toward the horizon until their eyes burned. And when at last sails appeared in distant light, white wings cutting across blue, the cry that rose from the settlement was not joy alone. It was relief sharpened by survival. It was the sound of people clawed raw by desperation, realizing they had lived through something designed to break them. The supply ships brought flour, salted pork, tools, medicines, maps, and promises. But they could not bring back the lives lost to hunger. They could not erase the madness that flickered behind eyes still haunted by nights of empty plates. And they could not stop the colony from remembering how close death had sat beside them, how it breathed against their skin like a wolf waiting for nightfall. When bellies filled again, when flesh returned to gaunt limbs, when laughter, hesitant, fragile, began to echo in evening air, a strange transformation settled over the settlement. Something had changed. The colony had endured the unendurable. Hunger had carved its name into every soul. And what remained was not simple survival, but something colder, harder, unyielding as iron. Because hunger teaches. It teaches exactly what you are capable of when stripped of choice. It teaches that suffering may visit, but so too can endurance. It teaches that those who live through famine carry within them a memory sharper than any blade. A reminder that comfort is not guaranteed, that civilization is a thin cloth easily torn, that beneath order lies chaos waiting patiently. And yet, hunger also leaves scars. Trust becomes fragile. Compassion dims. A man who is starved learns to hide bread. A community that has watched neighbors die learns not to speak of weakness. The colony grew after the hunger years, grew in number, in ambition, in confidence. But deep beneath the surface, hunger remained, buried in memory like a fossil of suffering. It shaped the people. It hardened them. It prepared them, unknowingly, for what would come next: gold, greed, rebellion, and the forging not just of a penal outpost, but of something calling itself a nation. But nations are not born clean. They're forged in fire, in blood, in hunger, in secrets. And as the colony wiped sweat from its brow and looked toward a future shimmering like heat on the horizon, it did not realize yet that another chapter was waiting. One filled with fortune and violence, prosperity and injustice, hope and silence. The hunger years had not been the end. They had been preparation, a dark schooling in survival. And now, with stomachs full and eyes looking forward, the colony would discover that wealth can be as dangerous as famine, and that sometimes prosperity hides sins deeper than hunger ever could. When the hunger years loosened their grip and the colony's bones stopped rattling from starvation, something shifted in the air. Survival was no longer enough. People wanted more than rations, more than punishment, more than merely continuing to exist on the edge of the world. The British Empire had planted its flag and planted its system of fear, and now the strange, harsh land itself began whispering of possibilities, of riches, of reward. And those whispers crystallized into a single intoxicating word: gold. The glimmer began quietly at first, a rumor carried on the dusty wind, whispered between workers in fields and murmured over mugs in dim, sweating taverns. A glint in a riverbed here, a strange metallic speck in a miner's palm there. And then suddenly, the truth exploded like a storm across sunburnt hills. Gold had been found. Real gold, bright as sunrise and heavy with promise. A treasure buried beneath the soil convicts once cursed, guarded by a land they had once seen only as prison and torment. And with that revelation, the world changed. Ships no longer arrived trembling with chained men. Instead, they docked heavy with ambition. Fortune seekers poured in. Americans, Chinese laborers, Irish dreamers, failed aristocrats desperate for redemption, adventurers in tattered coats, ex-convicts who now believed fate owed them something for their years of pain. They came with shovels and pans, with calloused hands and burning hunger. Not the hunger of empty belly, but the hunger of craving more than life had ever offered. The gold fields swelled like fever. Camps sprouted overnight, rough timber shelters clinging to hillsides, fires flickering like restless spirits. Tents flapped in wild wind. Back-breaking labor returned, but it felt different. For the first time, suffering came not at the lash of authority, but at the pull of possibility. Men bent their backs willingly, because beneath the earth, wealth gleamed like salvation. Yet gold is not a gentle master. It awakens the most primitive of human instincts: greed, ambition, desperation, paranoia. Hope becomes sharp, trust becomes thin, and in the madness of digging, of sifting dirt and stone, people sometimes forgot they were not breaking chains anymore. They were simply trading one bondage for another. Fortunes were made overnight. Fortunes also vanished with the sunrise. For every man who held a heavy nugget and felt destiny shift in his palm, hundreds left empty-handed, knuckles split, dreams collapsing into dust. And as wealth rose in glittering piles, so did resentment. Former convicts who once feared the lash now faced new enemies. Powerful merchants, wealthy squatters, government officials determined to control the flow of gold like they once controlled the flow of rations. Because empire does not loosen its fingers easily. Gold, too, was to be regulated, taxed, owned. Diggers were forced to buy mining licenses, papers that choked them with debt before they dug a single shovelful of earth. The same empire that once starved them now demanded payment for the soil beneath their feet. And when they refused, soldiers arrived, not with kindness, but with the familiar cold glint of enforced authority. Protests began, then anger, then powder, flame, and rebellion. The Eureka Rebellion, a moment that would later be dressed in patriotic cloth, was not born from noble speeches or political theory. It was born from exhaustion, from men who once labored under chains, now refusing to bend under stamped paper and colonial swagger. They built a stockade, raised a new flag, one stitched with stars, like constellations guiding lost souls, and swore to stand as free men or fall facing muskets. The government crushed them. Blood stained the ground once more. But something irreversible had happened. The convict spirit, beaten, starved, and buried under authority, had stood up, and it did not return to its knees. Yet as gold reshaped the colony's destiny and forged the early outlines of a national identity, another story continued in silence. Because wealth does not erase cruelty, it only buries it deeper. For every miner celebrating prosperity, there were First Nations people watching their land ripped apart again, watching ancient riverbeds churned into mud, sacred places desecrated under picks and boots, hunting grounds claimed by strangers with paper maps and foreign laws. The gold that built towns also buried culture. The gold that made legends also fueled loss. In letters and diaries, settlers celebrated progress. Newspapers boasted of a new shining future. But between the lines, a darker truth lingered. Justice remained uneven. Power remained unkind. Lives continued to disappear quietly into the soil. And silence, that faithful companion of empire, did its work well. The story of colonial Australia is often told as triumph. Convicts becoming citizens, struggling settlers rising to prosperity. A wild frontier tamed by grit and courage. But behind each of those polished sentences lies a truth as old and sharp as the continent itself. Nations do not emerge cleanly. They are forged in contradiction, built on both suffering and survival, lit by ambition while shadowed by cruelty. Gold brought wealth. It brought towns and roads and bustling markets. It brought opera houses and railways and dreams. But it also brought corruption, violence, exclusion, prosperity for some, hardship for others. And always, beneath the surface, the whisper of things the colony wished to forget. The whispers did not disappear. They simply waited. They waited beneath the foundations of glittering buildings. They waited in unmarked graves by riverbanks. They waited in stories passed quietly between elders, far from official records. They waited in the land itself, which remembers in silence. Because the soil of Australia holds memory. It remembers the barefoot child taken from her mother. It remembers the convict who broke in spirit long before his body fell. It remembers the warrior who stood his ground though history refused to speak his name. It remembers hunger. It remembers whips. It remembers gold dust sticking to trembling fingers and disappointment sinking like lead. And as the sun set on the gold fields, as prosperity spread its glittering light over a land still bleeding from hidden wounds, a new Australia began to emerge, one shaped by both triumph and trauma, resilience and ruthlessness. What rose from the ashes of punishment and poverty was not yet a nation, but something stirring, complicated, conflicted. A land where pain and pride learned to live side by side, where silence covered graves, but memory continued to breathe beneath each step, where one future was built and another was buried. And so, as the colony marched forward into grander streets and broader ambitions, the ghosts marched beside it, unseen, unspoken, but never gone. Because history cannot be forgotten just because it is inconvenient. And truth does not vanish simply because power demands quiet. Australia's golden age had begun, but beneath its shine lay the shadows of its beginning. Shadows cast by chains, by hunger, by blood, and by silence. And only time would tell whether those shadows would fade or whether they would stretch forward forever across the red dust and lonely plains, reminding every generation of the price paid for a nation. Thank you for watching. Hit the like button, share this story, and subscribe to the channel for more hidden histories and untold truths.